maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island.
1962, John F. Kennedy makes a bombshell speech in which he says that the Soviet Union is essentially developing missiles on the island of Cuba within striking distance of the United States. This essentially brings forth the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, this was indeed a crisis because this was probably the closest that we've ever, meaning the world, has come to essentially outright nuclear obliteration. There were missiles on that island, but there's a lot that's left out of the story. Now, from the standpoint of the American public during that particular time, their thought was Kennedy stared down Khrushchev, and in doing so was able to essentially bring down the tensions through his steely determination, etc. Nonsense. All of that was outright propaganda in regards to what actually took place. The American public was left in the dark. History doesn't necessarily rhyme, but it damn sure repeats. And doesn't necessarily repeat, but it damn sure rhymes. And we are at a time where it's rhyming. Let's think back for the moment for what actually took place. John F. Kennedy had been trying to kill Khrushchev. Had been trying to kill Castro. First point. Second point. John F. Kennedy had been castigating Eisenhower and Khrushchev for Eisenhower and Nixon for a missile gap. Now, the missile gap was supposedly that the United States was behind in missiles to the Soviet Union. There was a missile gap, but the missile gap was the exact opposite of that. Kennedy knew it was the exact opposite of that, but that didn't stop him from saying that Eisenhower and the Nixon administration had fell down on the job and was allowing the Soviet Union to exceed us in their nuclear and missile capabilities. Truth is, our nuclear capabilities, in some respects, outstrip theirs by a factor of 9. And depending on whether you want to talk about submarines or whether you want to talk about the ability to get those payloads, meaning nuclear submarines or nuclear bombers, again, we outpace them by a factor of 2 or 4, depending on which element you're talking about. Didn't stop Kennedy from going that route. For the moment, we never asked this question, but what does Castro think of this, and what does Khrushchev think of this? The United States government had tried to whack Castro, if I'm not mistaken, over 100 times. And from the standpoint of Khrushchev and Castro both know that there is no missile gap, and they also both know that the United States, because they're calling for a missile gap, will be dramatically ramping up their capabilities on top of what they already have as a dramatic advantage. If you're Khrushchev, you're looking for some way to find some level of parity to even the scales. And if you are Fidel Castro, you are looking for a way to maintain your power, seeing as you have a superpower that is trying to take you out. These two positions intersect where Castro was perfectly okay with allowing the Soviet Union to put missiles and weapons in his country because he, again, wanted to protect himself, and the Soviet Union is looking to level this off. Now, the government of the United States or the people in the U.S. don't know this. They just think the Soviet Union, for no reason, just decided to put its missiles into Cuba. Here's the catch. Despite the fact that there was all sorts of provocations that led us to where we were from a standpoint of the missile crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis, ultimately rational actors prevailed. Khrushchev sends Kennedy a note, a compromise. Now, there were 2 notes that were sent. This is the interesting part. There were 2 notes. One from Khrushchev, another one from the hardliners. Khrushchev sends a deal. The hardliners sends a secondary deal, in which case the moderates and the people who are doing negotiations are out of the process. Kennedy accepts the first deal, ignores the hardliners' statement, and for the most part, the statements that he made addressed essentially meaning back channels. They didn't necessarily tell the American public this. The American public wasn't let in on this. And not just the American public, even elements of the own government itself didn't know about this. Khrushchev makes a deal. Let's get rid of the Jupiter missiles in Turkey, and then we can get rid of these other missiles in Cuba. Kennedy accepts. Now, Kennedy accepts this despite the fact that many of the people in his staff and many of the people in the military that was around him wanted a war. And they assume that since we have this advantage from the standpoint of nuclear armaments, let's do it. Let's win this. Because we can win it right now because of the advantages that we have. Kennedy didn't allow this, and Kennedy was able to save face and allowed the Soviets to save face. Because Kennedy didn't go with the policy that you're just going to do what I say. Kennedy went with the policy of, fine, if you're bothered by these missiles from Turkey being right there, the Jupiter missiles, we'll move them if you move the ones from Cuba. Here's another interesting point. Kennedy called Eisenhower and questioned whether or not Khrushchev was serious about launching those missiles. Eisenhower said, no, there's no way Khrushchev is going to launch those missiles. Eisenhower was wrong. The order had already been given for the missiles to be launched. Meaning, if Kennedy did any strikes on Cuba, those auto-launch things. It didn't need Khrushchev's permission. The missiles were going to be automatically launched. We were at the brink of a nuclear war. But ultimately, you had rational actors in the political process that was able to pull it back and allow each party in this deal to save some degree of face, allowing both sides to step down from the precipice. Right now, the Trump administration is taking a policy of quote-unquote pressure. What I would guarantee you is that within the context of that pressure policy, Saudi Arabia oil fields on fire wasn't part of that process. Donald Trump has ratcheted up tensions with this notion of a pressure policy on Iran, and one step after the next has been outright belligerent, pulling out of the JCPOA, declaring the Revolutionary Guard a terrorist organization, passing and increasing, tightening sanctions. Again, sanctions are an act of war. Those sanctions kill. And putting military assets closer and closer into that region of the world. And you can even make an argument that the weapons that are being dumped in Saudi Arabia may be put in the hands of terrorists that may also try some kind of clandestine operation in the country itself. That's bad. All of that is literally ratcheting up tensions and outright aggression and threats to Iran. The pressure strategy, the goal was, if you're talking to John Bolton, is either toppling the government, which Trump says is not his goal, but probably to some degree is his goal, and at the very least was John Bolton's goal, whether he expressed that to Trump or not. Or get them back to some deal with the JCPOA. My argument had been, you have two outcomes, either a war or Trump's backs down. There was no potential for a deal. The moderates was burnt the moment that Trump pulled out of the JCPOA, because it was the moderates that were allowed the JCPOA to take place. And when Trump pulled out and castigated Iran, well, now you have this situation where the moderates itself have been burned. There are no more moderates, and you just have hardliners. We can have no deals with the United States unless they go back to the table, the JCPOA. The foreign minister has said it. Ayatollah has said it. The president has said it. The entire government means it. They mean it. Means the pressure strategy has failed. It means that everything that Donald Trump has did up to this point from the standpoint of Iran has been one step to the next, despite whether or not he wants a war, inexorably leading us to that very reality. Because there's no capacity for a deal. And if indeed there's no capacity for a deal, you have told the media and the news press all of these things that Iran has did, all of these failings, all of the attacks on us, and how we are just the great savior defending all of this stuff. The oil fields are burning. And within the context of your pressure strategy, and I actually do believe that Trump didn't want a war, your allies have just said Iran did it. The media is asking you, are you going to strike Iran? And the media is asking you this because, again, you have ratcheted up tensions. You have said they were a terrorist organization. You have went so far as to name all of these things that they've done. And so from the media standpoint, logically, if you're saying they're doing all of these things, will there be a strike? Trump backs down. Again, my argument here is there are only so many face-saving mechanisms that are built into this process where Trump is going to be able to accept without going into the context of a war. And one choice after the next has inexorably led us to this war in spite of what the president wanted. I say over and over again that oftentimes what the president wants is subordinate to political wins. And here we are again. In 60s, we had rational actors that could pull us down from the brink. It's the same thing true here. And does Donald Trump understand this concept of saving face and the ability and the need to allow your opponents to be able to do the same? Otherwise, there is no capacity for a resolution. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is an early morning soapbox, 4 a.m., but I've been trying to get this video out for God knows how long, so I want to get this video out while I'm awake and thinking about it. Guys, if you dig this content and you find yourself coming back often, please like, share, and subscribe. Also, this content is brought to you by you, and this video will be demonetized because Iran is in the title. So if you really dig it, please consider supporting through PayPal or Patreon. Donald Trump pulls out the JCPOA. In fact, let's start in a different place. Saudi Arabia is in a murderous war with Yemen. The Obama administration green-lights this war with Yemen. He knew it was going to be murderous. However, he wanted to get the JCPOA passed. And in wanting to get the JCPOA passed, his thought was, I'll green-light it for the Saudis and they'll leave me alone to my devices to get the JCPOA passed and they won't interfere with it. Obama gets his JCPOA, the Saudis get their war, and here we are. Now, 4 years in? Bloody campaign. Hundreds of thousands of people dead. Weaponized starvation, weaponized illness. All of these outright epidemics in regards to the way they've been prosecuting this war. A murderous, flagrant disregard for civilians. Children, school buses being bombed. In one case, a prison was bombed. They have a flagrant disregard for civilians, and we, the United States, has assisted them in prosecution of this war. Hundreds of thousands of people dead. Now, Saudi Arabia gets hit, meaning that rebels, those Houthis, up their technology, and in upping that technology was able to essentially hit Saudi Arabia, taking down 5% of the world's oil. And all of a sudden, the world hair is on fire. But again, they've waged a murderous campaign against the Houthis for the last 4 years. And nobody cared when they were bombing school buses. Nobody cared when they were maiming and starving children to death, or for that matter, using disease as a weapon. Nobody cared. Everybody now cares about the Saudis. Saudi Arabia comes out and says Iran did it. The U.S. comes out and says Iran did it. The president of the United States does not want a war. And yet, his government has said Iran did it. And what's more important here is that one step after the next, Donald Trump has inexorably taken a policy making it more and more likely for a war, despite saying he doesn't necessarily want a war. And the catch is, the movement and momentum that Trump is taking on this particular policy had one or two outcomes. Either Iran capitulates, which wasn't part of the process, or there's a war, or he backs down. If he's not willing to back down, and he's not willing to give Iran something to save face, meaning Trump going back to the JCPOA, then there is nowhere else to go in this process. Trump has gotten more and more belligerent. And as he's gotten more and more belligerent, Iran is taking a policy of like, look, if you're not attending to a deal, we're not going to attend to the deal either. Meaning that it brings us to a certain degree of brinksmanship. Not because of Iran, by the way, because Iran was living up to the tenets of the deal, but because of Trump and the policies that he has taken. Trump, in the various capacities, has had to lose face over and over again to prevent a war. And there's only so many times where you are justifiably losing face within the context of the momentum that you're using that is taking us to war. And let me show you what I mean. A drone gets shot out of the sky. What does Trump do? Everybody's asking Trump, are you going to have a strike? Are you going to have a strike? Are you going to have a strike? What does Trump say? Trump comes out and says this.
Somebody that shouldn't have been doing what they did. I think they made a mistake. And I'm not just talking to the country made a mistake. I think that somebody under the command of that country made a big mistake.
Right there. Are you going to do a military strike? Are you going to do a military strike? Nope, because I think somebody made a stupid mistake over there. Any random neocon potentially would have done a strike. Trump, in this case, personally doesn't want a war. His brand, to some degree, is not getting this country into wars. And so regardless of Bolton and Pompeo and Haspel, all of them that are around him saying, you must do a strike, do a military strike, do a military strike, Trump says, no, somebody was behaving stupidly. That is a face-saving maneuver. That is him losing face in order to prevent a larger conflict that he can't control. Here's another one. This is after Saudi Arabia and the United States accusing Iran of the strike. The Houthis claim responsibility for it. I'm perfectly okay with staying with that. If Houthis was augmented by Iranian technology, so what? Houthis are relatively allied with Iran. The United States has been assisting Saudi Arabia in a murderous campaign. Why wouldn't Houthis get support? And now that they have the capacity to hit Saudi Arabia, why should I care about this? The issue here is that Donald Trump is sending forces into the Middle East in order to back up Saudi Arabia. And he's putting sanctions on the Bank of Iran, saying that these sanctions are vicious and these are the worst sanctions or the hardest sanctions in the world. Why is he doing that? Again, that's another face-saving mechanism, and he only has so many of those left. Look at this. This is the response. Because again, everybody's saying, are you going to have a strike? Are you going to have a strike? Because why? Because Trump has pushed us in this direction where he's saying Iran has done all these things, and the most logical consequence of that is, well, if you're saying Iran was doing all of this stuff, and now this provocative action is taking place, logically, are you going to do a strike? This is Trump.
Boil into war. Instead, he counseled restraint.
For all of those that say, oh, they should do it, it shows weakness, it shows, actually, in my opinion, it shows strength. Because the easiest thing I could do, okay, go ahead, knock out 15 different major things in Iran. I could do that.
Again, face-saving. Any random neocon would have struck in defense of Saudi Arabia. Trump does not want to do that. What Trump knows, what Trump absolutely knows, is that right now he is losing control. That one step after the next, meaning in the calculus of squeezing Iran, this wasn't part of it, I guarantee you. This drags the president in a position that the president didn't think he was going to be in. Meaning Trump thought he was going to maintain a certain degree of control in regards to the pressure strategy, and that the pressure strategy was going to bear fruit. Well, no, it didn't bear fruit. And now you have a situation where the people are blaming Iran for something that is taking down 5% of the world's oil. And they're looking at you, asking you, what are you going to do? And Trump comes out and says, look, I could attack. However, there's a certain degree of strength and restraint. There is a certain degree of strength and restraint. But in this very specific instance, you are listening to a bunch of neocons, and up to this point, you have moved in a very specific path. It is a little bit weird that you pull back now in this particular path. It's not that I want him to attack. Don't misunderstand me. I'm making a point that him doing that is a face-saving mechanism. It's a maneuver to pull back and to give a justifiable excuse on why he doesn't go through the pathway that he, for the most part, has threatened this entire 2 years. Here's another one. Face-saving maneuver.
Well, there are many options, as you know, Phil. There are many options, and there's the ultimate option, and there are options a lot less than that. And
there's the ultimate options, and there are options a lot less than that. Again, over and over again, the media is asking Trump, are you going to strike? Are you going to strike? Are you going to strike? Why? Because Donald Trump is taking a position of saying Iran has done all of these things wrong, and here are all their failings. And if that's true, and now you have hardware going down, meaning initially it was just bellicose language. And then you have drones being shot down. And then you have oil fields being taken down. And they're blaming Iran for all of this stuff. And the media is asking, well, if you are logically saying that Iran was responsible for all of this, what are you going to do? In this case, he says, all right, I'm going to put a ton of sanctions on their banks. And he says, these are the highest sanctions ever imposed on a country. He's saying it because he needs to create a justification for why he's not doing a military strike, because all of this momentum up to this point has inexorably led to this notion of If you do X, we will do Y, meaning force, or we will respond. Well, up to this point, he's been trying to find every face-saving mechanism possible in order to create a justifiable reason for not to strike based on what he has considered, his administration has considered, and said was provocative action by Iran. There are not many of these left. Donald Trump has taken one policy after the next, just like Kennedy before him, of essentially bellicosity. And whereas maybe behind the scenes, it was behind the scenes with Kennedy, it is in the forefront with Iran. Kennedy had enough sense to back down and to come up with a face-saving mechanism where the Soviet Union can walk away with that without this notion that they had just been beaten, and where the United States could walk away with that, getting also its own political concessions, was getting those missiles out of Cuba. I'm saying the same thing would need to take place here if there's any resolution to this particular issue. Iran is not backing down. There are no more moderates in Iran. You burned the moderates when you took this course of action. The deal that you've pulled out of and all the actions that you've taken after that, for the most part, has created a pressure to not have any negotiations with you, meaning that all of this depends on Trump. Trump's will and Trump's decision space has constrained further and further and further. And again, the notion that all of this is within the president's control is ludicrous. This could have dragged the United States into a war. A larger strike will drag the U.S. into a war. Yeah. A strike will drag the U.S. into a war. And again, this is assuming that it was Iran. We don't know that as a flat fact. And considering that there are various forces in the region that will be happy to pull the U.S. into a war, be it Israel, or for that matter, be it Saudi Arabia, I can't necessarily say this entirely was the Houthis. We need to take a note from Kennedy and Khrushchev on this. It's true that Kennedy led us closer into the potential conflict, but it's also true that he was a rational actor and a government of people who wanted to have and get involved in a war. He was able to put the neocons to the side and come up with sane policies in order to bring down this escalation, essentially to de-escalate. If Trump is not willing to do the same thing, these press conferences, there are only so many face-saving maneuvers that you can use. And right now, at this point, Donald Trump is being cornered. If anything else happens, what else is he going to sanction? What else do you have to sanction? And beyond what else do you have to sanction, what other excuse can you come up with that is going to prevent you from... My point is this. Because of the policies that Trump has taken, he's led us into this particular direction. This direction has made war more likely, not less likely. When we had a deal in place, and for the most part, Iran was sticking to the deal, and the other countries co-signed Iran sticking to the deal, there was a certain degree of stability in regards to that particular region, at least from the standpoint of the U.S. and the tensions that were being hoisted upon our society, because everyone, they kept saying Iran wants a bomb. Iran wants a bomb. Well, Iran wants a bomb for obvious reasons. Israel has a nuclear bomb. Israel continues to attack that country. And if that country is attacked by Israel and they get into a larger conflict, they want the ability to defend itself. They also want the ability to defend itself from the United States, who is a hostile actor in this case. The Houthis, getting the capability to hit Saudi Arabia is an issue for Saudi Arabia. They have led a murderous war with Yemen and against the Houthis, and despite billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars in technology, for the most part, couldn't beat a band of rebels. Houthis have gained the capacity to hit Saudi Arabia. That's between Saudi Arabia and the Houthis. If Iran is part of it, so what? The United States is working with Saudi Arabia to prosecute it. I don't care. But beyond the point, the Houthis said they did it. I give it credit to the Houthis. Regardless of what the Houthis say, the Trump administration, and again, Saudi Arabia, are blaming Iran. Ergo, they're looking for some retaliatory action, because the moment that you blame them, you got to do something about it. Well, if anything else happens in that region, what other face-saving mechanism is Trump going to use to justify not striking them? Because based on his own policy and the ratcheting up of tensions, at some point, you have no more sanctions. At some point, you can't just send additional troops. At some point, the rationale is either to lose face or to strike. And those are going to be the only two options that Trump is inexorably leading us to. It is true that Kennedy got us closer to a war, but it is also true that Kennedy had enough sense to get us out. I'll leave it here. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks all.